It took the party of dwarves and Michael Miller the mapmaker the better part of a day to reach the entrance to the dwarf colony near the peak of the mountain. At this altitude there was plenty of snow on the ground, yet no tracks in them, nor any sign of life. Even the animals seemed to avoid the area. Shalmet approached the stairs that led up to the iron doors, one of which hung open. Peering inside, he could see nothing, no dwarves, yet no immediate sign of danger. And so, backed up by his comrades, he stepped inside. The entry hall was a shambles. Walls were crumbled and statues were toppled. All that remained were 2 stone statues of dwarven lords, one of which was missing an arm. There was clearly trouble, but where, and what had happened? The dwarves searched the room thoroughly, but found no answers. Domhnall investigated the adjoining room where supplies and pack animals were normally kept, but found it empty. Leroto looked over one of the statues that was still standing. Its weapon was cleaved on both ends, but otherwise stood testament to the lifelike skill of the dwarf artisans. Shalmet stepped up the stairs to look over the tablet of records, which often sat near the entryway to record strangers entering and leaving, but the tablet was gone. The dwarves branched out in different directions, Agrigor and Carlos following the main hall toward the dining area, and the others heading toward some of the living areas. Again, everyone found the crumbled walls and toppled decorations with only a few statues of great warrior dwarves still standing. Agrigor observed that these statues stood in unusually informal locations, none of them in a prominent spot where one would expect to see a statue depicting a hero. He said nothing, however, assuming there was something he just didn't know about this group of dwarves. As the others fanned out to look through the many chambers of the living area, Michael found himself alone in a room with a strangely placed statue, located as if guarding a hallway, but he blocked so much of it that one could hardly get past. The statue was so perfectly depicted in motion, it gave Michael goosebumps. Shalmet came upon a similar statue, placed such that one could barely get by. He recognized something else odd about it, too. This was not the statue of a dwarf lord. Like the others, this statue was of a common warrior, the type of individual that was not usually depicted in statue form. Domhnall, looking over the statue of 2 other dwarves, put it all together. He recognized one of them as someone he used to know, and as his eyes followed the pike of the statue to look down the hall, he shouted, "Medus!" But that's all he got out before his eyes mashed with a figure down the hall, and he quickly turned to stone. Everyone who heard him knew exactly what he was going to say. A Medusa was on the loose. His halted scream seemed to imply he had seen it. Everyone grabbed their arms, but averted their gazes. Leroto took a big swig of whiskey, then began singing a dwarven drinking song that echoed through the halls, and lifted the spirits of the men. Even Michael, a non-dwarf, was pumped up by it, though he had no idea how they would fight something they could not look at. He had learned about Medusas in school. They were hideous creatures with serpents for hair and faces that, when one looked into them, turned you to stone. They would somehow have to fight this creature blindly. And they closed their eyes as they listened for her movements. They heard scampering, but not from the Medusa herself. A horde of humanoid monsters ran out of hiding in cracks and gaps in the walls and set upon each of them. They beat on the closed-eyed dwarves, catching them flat-footed. The one on Agrigor got a lucky blow and knocked him out cold with 2 hefty blows delivered right in a row. It then turned on Carlos, who spotted how the creatures lived with the Medusa. They had no eyes. These were Grimlocks. The dwarves realized they had to fight, so they opened their eyes and swung. Carlos took down the creature attacking him, and the one that knocked out Agrigor. He looked down the corridor to see if there was more, and instead saw the face of the hag, and he turned to stone. Leroto was still singing his drinking songs to lift the spirits of his comrades even as they fell. He got surrounded by 2 of the beasts which closed in on each side of him. He tried to take on one of them, but they pummeled him from both sides, bashing in his skull. Shalmet slew the beast before him, then turned to see the 2 that had taken down Leroto closing in on him. He readied himself, and just before they reached him, Michael appeared out of the darkness behind the creatures. He stabbed one in the back, and Shalmet took off the head of the other. An arrow flew in from the flank, grazing Shalmet. He turned slightly, but did not look at his attacker. He knew who it was, and what would happen to him if he saw her. Instead, he got a bearing on the direction the arrow came from. He turned in that direction, placing his shield in front of his face, and he charged full speed. He heard arrows deflecting off his shield as he felt it buckle a couple times. Then they stopped. Shalmet was maneuvering over piles of rubble, and as he came over a rise, his shield maneuvered too high, and the Medusa got in a shot. It raced past the shield and pierced his armor. Shalmut gasped with surprise and regret as he stumbled. A second arrow flew at his staggering form and hit him in the chest again, this time ending his life. Michael saw the daring charge and the small body tumbling to a hard stop on the ground. The leader of the expedition was dead, and so seemed the rest of the party. He vaguely spotted a shadow in the dark beginning to move toward him. His inferior human eyes saved him in this instance, for he was unable to make out the details in her face. She, no doubt, could see him, and soon she would emerge within the torchlight. So Michael ran. He knew not to where, but he hurried around a couple bends to lose her immediate sight. The Medusa followed, stepping over the corpses of the fallen dwarves and her pets. Her bow was ready, as were her eyes. The human was easy to track. He required torchlight, and she could see where it went from several chambers away. The human had evidently reached a dead end as the torchlight stopped. She rounded a corner to find it, and found only the torch resting against the wall, flickering in the dark. Realizing her mistake a moment too late, the Medusa tried to turn around, but a sharp blade pierced through the back, its end emerging through the front. She gasped for air, finding none. She determined to take Michael with her, and she turned her head. He turned away, but he hardly needed to. The torchlight illuminated her from behind, casting her in silhouette. He could not see her hideous form, and could therefore not be affected by it. The snakes convulsed and hissed in unison with her twitching body. Michael lay her down and held a hand to her back until he felt her muscles stop twitching, and until he heard the snakes hissing no more. When at last they were silent and she was still, Michael grabbed the torch. Careful not to look at the ground, Michael hurried out of the chamber. He could still hear more of the Grimlocks moving around the ruins. They would not be attracted to his torch, but they would hear his movement, so he maneuvered stealthily through the halls, searching for dwarf survivors. When he reached Carlos and Agrigor, he found that Agrigor was still alive, just unconscious. He woke him, but immediately told him to be quiet, something Agrigor was good at. Michael briefly explained the situation and said they had to get out. Agrigor nodded, and they made their way toward the front. The entrance was covered with the Medusa's pets. They would not be getting out that way. They searched for other options, and Michael led Agrigor to some tunnels that were being carved out for future development deeper into the mountain. Michael recognized this spot. As a mapmaker, he was used to associating a real location with a location he saw on a map. This was the area that had been X'd out on the map he had seen earlier that day, where it had been written, "Not to be explored." But it was too late. They had already gone in that direction. There was no turning back.